Putin condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is not clickbait. The Pale Führer himself explicitly stated that attacking and bombing an independent sovereign state is a clear violation of the United Nations Charter and international law.
No way.
Putin shared this brilliant thought during a phone conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, condemning the destruction of Iranian nuclear and military facilities. It's quite interesting how the Kremlin's little boy in his underwear truly sees things. Eliminating the nuclear program of a terrorist state that openly declares the genocide of the Israeli people is a clear violation of international law, but wiping Ukrainian cities completely off the map and occupying foreign territories, that's entirely different. That's sacred and truly homely.
Today, Russian society is clearly experiencing a significant shortage of spiritual bonds.
The cynicism of Russian fascists has reached its peak, and for some reason, this has come as a surprise to the Israeli leadership. Strangely enough, Prime Minister Netanyahu personally maintained a friendship with Putin and stubbornly refused to spoil relations with Moscow. Spoiler: this did not prevent Russia from actively cooperating with all of Israel's enemies. Moscow armed, financed, and trained militants. But let's take it step by step.
The Israeli Prime Minister laid flowers and a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier by the Kremlin wall and observed a minute of silence in memory of those who died during World War II.
Despite the fact that Israel belongs to the Western civilized world, Netanyahu demonstratively ignored those very Western values. While Russia was occupying Crimea and unleashing carnage in Donbass, the Israeli Prime Minister started calling Putin a friend and visited Moscow more often than the Western Wall.
I want to wish you all the very best in the new year. As they say in Russian, Happy New Year. May the new year bring new happiness. And indeed, for thousands of you, the new year will bring new happiness. There were other wonderful events in the past year as well.
Let us remind you of the wonderful events that happened in the outgoing 2016. Bloody battles continue in Donbass. Shirokain, Mariinka, Avdiivka, Popasna. The international investigative group Bellingcat presented a report with irrefutable evidence of direct Russian aggression against Ukraine. And against this backdrop, Netanyahu, as if nothing had happened, congratulated the brotherly Russian people on the new year. Of course, the Israeli Prime Minister was pursuing his own internal and external political goals. Firstly, there is a huge Russian diaspora in Israel, many of whom still feel nostalgic for pioneers and Olivier salad. They love Putin and justify the Kremlin's actions out of habit because at 16 they had their first kiss at Artek and it felt good. So now, everything Moscow does is seen as right and pleasing. That's why the Israeli Prime Minister has to take into account the sentiments of a large number of his voters.
In Israel, parties have always formed before elections, and before the last election, some new parties were created, but their leaders always considered it necessary to include a Russian-speaking representative in a real position on their electoral list.
Secondly, Israel is pushed toward friendship with Moscow by the ring of enemies surrounding it, over whom the Kremlin has direct influence. Netanyahu naively believed that if he turned a blind eye to Russia's crimes in Ukraine, it would not help Iran, the Assad regime, and Islamists in their efforts to destroy the Promised Land. How wrong he was! The more Netanyahu wanted to be friends with Putin, the more the Moth supported the anti-Semites.
A meeting with Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, Vladimir Putin, met with him immediately after arriving in Tehran. There hasn't been a meeting like this since at least 2007.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Israel's ambiguous position has only worsened. Tel Aviv refused to provide Ukraine with weapons, including defensive ones, air defense systems, and radar data.
Isn't it truly time for your country to choose whose side you're on? Either with the democratic world, which is actively fighting against a profound threat to its very existence, or with those who simply turn a blind eye to Russian terror, even when it gravely threatens to completely destroy global security.
Moreover, Israel even voted against the Ukrainian resolution condemning Russia's aggression at the UN. Of course, this does not reflect the opinions and sentiments of all Israelis. But this is the current position of the Israeli state.
When we talk about the resolution that Israel voted against, I think that most of us here in the studio, and unfortunately most of our viewers as well, have not actually read the resolution itself, which states that no territorial acquisitions resulting from the threat or use of force should be recognized as legal. This means that by voting for this resolution, if we had voted yes, it would mean our control over Judea and Samaria. We would have essentially voted against our own control over Judea and Samaria. That's why, in principle, Israel simply could not vote for this resolution.
From 2022 to 2023, Netanyahu continued to cozy up to Putin so that Moscow would keep the radical terrorists on a leash and not interfere with Israel's strikes on Iran and Syria. The plan was good, but it was unrealistic from the very beginning. While Putin smiled at Netanyahu and spoke of the brotherhood between the two peoples, Moscow launched unprecedented military cooperation with Israel's main enemy, Iran. In exchange for Shahed drones and munitions, Russia supplied Tehran with aircraft and air defense systems, and most importantly, missile and nuclear technologies. In other words, it was rapidly helping Iran create weapons of mass destruction, which it needs for only one purpose: to destroy Israel.
Oh, how convenient.
As a bonus, the Kremlin armed Hamas, Hezbollah, and other like-minded groups dreaming of eliminating the Jewish state. All the terrorists somehow miraculously ended up equipped with Russian weapons.
Russian weapons were mentioned here, specifically the Kornet anti-tank missile systems. And by the way, this is undoubtedly one of the most incredibly dangerous and particularly significant weapon systems currently in existence. These Russian weapons have been in the hands of Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists for a long time. So this is nothing new. Back in 2006, during the Second Lebanon War, Hezbollah used Kornet missiles against Israeli forces for the first time.
All of this culminated in the 7th of October 2023. Hamas militants invaded Israel and carried out a massacre, killing people indiscriminately. After this barbaric raid, the terrorists took hundreds of hostages.
Honestly, I went through hell. Something we never imagined. We never thought we would find ourselves in such a situation. They rampaged through our kibbutz. They kidnapped me, put me on a motorcycle, and drove me through the fields. When they stormed our homes, they beat people. Some were kidnapped, like me.
A real war was unleashed against Israel. Iran sponsored the terrorists, and Russia supported Iran. Netanyahu's entire peace-loving strategy of flirting with the fascist Kremlin regime turned out, to put it mildly, to be a mistake. And to put it bluntly, we can't say it according to YouTube's rules. After the large-scale terrorist attack, dear friend Putin and the brotherly Russian people invited the Hamas leadership to visit and express their support.
Meanwhile, in Moscow, they are receiving a high-ranking representative of Hamas, whose militants carried out the bloodiest attack on Israel since the Holocaust, and whom many countries have recognized as a terrorist organization. This is not the first time that Russia has hosted members of the Hamas movement. The last time members of the group visited Moscow was this past spring. A few days ago, during the vote on the UN resolution regarding the situation in the Middle East, Russia used its veto power. For this position, Hamas thanked the Kremlin.
Israel's retaliatory actions against the terrorists were condemned in Moscow and compared to genocide. Russian propaganda attacked Israel in the best traditions of Nazi Germany. Even Goebbels would have envied such anti-Semitism.
Go and fuck yourselves! You are all traitors! You go and fuck yourselves, you son of a bitch!
Unlike the nation of Israel, which notably voted at the United Nations against condemning Russia, Moscow, on the other hand, happily supported all anti-Israeli resolutions. At the same time, the Kremlin increased its support for terrorists and, most importantly, for Iran.
Under attack in a situation where the members of the council have been going in circles for almost a year and still cannot force the Israeli authorities to stop their punitive military machine. Let us recall that if the Security Council's decision on a ceasefire, which we formally already have, is not being observed, then the Council members can consider measures to ensure its implementation. The Security Council has relevant experience and all the necessary levers and means at its disposal, including in the context of a peacekeeping presence in the Middle East.
In 2025, Moscow finally turned its back on Israel's still outstretched hand. Russia and Iran formed a military alliance, complete with all the associated technologies and weaponry. Putin officially became the military ally of Israel's main and mortal enemy, with whom Israel is currently at war. Moreover, Iran is attacking Israel not without Moscow's assistance. So much for Netanyahu's successful foreign policy. He refused to support Ukraine in order not to spoil relations with Moscow. But Moscow saw this as a sign of weakness and openly turned against Israel. Putin literally shook hands with the murderers of Jews. By the way, with the very same hand he used to shake Netanyahu's hand. To paraphrase a famous person, those who choose humiliation over war end up getting both war and humiliation. Through its actions, Russia has humiliated Israel's trust and supported the war against it. It feels like it's time to change the foreign policy direction. It's obvious that as long as the Putin regime exists, it will endlessly support all of Israel's enemies. If the IDF destroys Hezbollah, someone else will take its place. If the regime in Iran is overthrown, Moscow will sponsor an anti-Israeli regime in another country. That's why the root of evil must be destroyed, the pseudo-empire must be dismantled. And there is only one country that can do this: Ukraine.
Here is the map that Budanov hung up for himself. This is how Russia will be divided. This is what they are preparing us for. That's why such a division is extremely dangerous, and we must not forget about it.
Israel must provide its maximum and unwavering support to its natural ally and supply the Ukrainian defense forces with absolutely everything necessary to inflict a decisive strategic defeat on Iran's primary military ally. All the more so, this is absolutely and entirely legal. By signing a significant military pact with Tehran, Moscow has become a completely legitimate and justifiable target for Israel.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.